In our headlines on this Tuesday, February 18th, here in South Korea. President Yoon's impeachment trial began its 9th formal hearing earlier today, and the Constitutional Court rejected an earlier request by the president's defense team for a rescheduling of Thursday's session, which coincides with the start of his criminal trial. Meanwhile, the South Korean government has dispatched a trade delegation to the U.S. for one-on-one negotiations to address the Trump administration's tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, as well as its upcoming reciprocal tariffs on all its trade partners. And over in Saudi Arabia, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is sitting down with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on Tuesday to lay the groundwork for a peace plan to end the war in Ukraine. We started the Constitutional Court here in Seoul, where the 9th hearing is taking place at President Yoon's impeachment trial. For details, I have our correspondent Oh Soo-young standing by live. Soo-young, it's good to have you on. Now, I understand today's hearing is witnessing the two sides laying out their respective arguments with regard to the legality of the president's declaration of martial law on December 3rd last year.
That's right, Sunny. So today's hearing began at 2 p.m, but without President Yoon in attendance. He was supposed to attend, but ended up sitting out the 9th trial hearing. And as the last few trial hearings have focused on questioning witnesses, the session today was intended for each side, the National Assembly's impeachment team and President Yoon's lawyers, to summarize their cases for and against impeachment, as well as to go over the evidence that the bench hasn't scrutinized yet. To go over the main arguments made so far, the National Assembly's panelists claimed that Yoon's declaration of martial law was illegal, as he did not go through proper cabinet procedures, as were his proclamation of martial law decrees. The panel says Yoon also tried to disrupt parliamentary activities by deploying troops to the National Assembly, as well as the National Election Commission, an independent constitutional body, and tried to arrest judicial figures. The panel continued to claim today that Yoon intended to shut down the National Assembly and cited how witnesses and other central figures so far have indicated there wasn't a proper cabinet meeting before the martial law declaration, and that the proclamation of the martial law orders was not approved by the cabinet either.
This is a direct attack on the principles of the rule of law and the separation of powers. From the perspective of constitutional protection, it is an absolutely unacceptable act.
Meanwhile, Yoon's side insists that martial law was constitutional as an executive right of the president, and that the opposition party had made it impossible for the government to function by constantly impeaching officials, railroading controversial bills through parliament, and dramatically cutting the budget. Yoon has also cited suspicions of election fraud at the National Election Commission and has called to investigate servers and ballot papers for irregularities.
Right, Soo-young. Moving forward then, what, Soo-young, can we expect on Thursday?
Well, on Thursday, there's set to be 3 witness examinations, beginning with Prime Minister Han Duck-soo. Now, Han has previously stated that the president has not held a proper cabinet meeting before declaring martial law on December 3rd. Also, there's a former Deputy Director of the National Intelligence Service, Hong Jang-won, who was actually summoned earlier this month by the National Assembly side, but he's going to be returning to be questioned by Yoon's legal team on Thursday. Hong claims there was a list of 14 to 16 figures the president wanted to arrest under martial law. Also, National Police Agency Commissioner General Choi will also stand witness after missing 2 sessions for health reasons. Both the National Assembly's panel and Yoon's legal team plan to question the Prime Minister and the Police Commissioner General.
So I also hear the Constitutional Court rejected an earlier request by the President's defense team for a rescheduling of Thursday's session.
Yes, that's right. So despite President Yoon's legal team's request to postpone Thursday's date to next Tuesday, citing a lack of preparation time, especially as President Yoon's legal team also has to cover his criminal trial proceedings, which begin the same day, the Constitutional Court nevertheless decided to push ahead with the 10th trial hearing on Thursday. And when Yoon's team asked for a reconsideration, the bench merely pushed back the hearing by an hour, so it will now begin at 3 p.m. instead of 2 p.m. Acting Chief Justice Moon Young-bae suggested that as Yoon's pre-trial for his criminal case is at 10 a.m. in the morning, the legal team should be able to make it to the Constitutional Court by the afternoon, and added that the judicial bench is also juggling 3 other trial hearings this week. So Thursday looks to be the last witness examination at this point, and as the court rejected all other applications made by Yoon's lawyers, as well as emphasizing the need for a swift trial, of course. Now, if there's one more session scheduled to wrap up the arguments made so far and also hear Yoon's closing statement, it's likely that a verdict will be delivered in the first half of March. The National Human Rights Commission on Monday adopted a statement calling for a lawful trial process that ensures the right to defend oneself in court and for a thorough witness examination process.
Right, I see. All right, Seong, thank you for that coverage. That was our Oh Seong with the latest on the president's impeachment trial. Moving on, both a South Korean government delegation and a separate business delegation are seeking talks with relevant American officials in the U.S. as the Trump administration prepares to put in place a broader blanket tariffs on its friends and foes in the name of, quote, fair trade. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
South Korea's Deputy Minister for Trade Park Jong-won arrived in the United States on Monday, where he's set to meet with a number of officials at the U.S. Department of Commerce and the Office of the U.S. Trade Representatives. Upon arrival, Park stressed the importance of holding the talks, especially as U.S. President Donald Trump's trade policies affect all of America's trading partners.
I believe America's major trading partners around the world are all affected, so I think that our country also needs to be even more careful in negotiating with the United States.
Park also said that he would seek mutually beneficial discussions during his talks in Washington by listening to what the U.S. has to say and explaining Seoul's positions. He also noted that talks on the tariff issue may continue following his visit, raising speculation that Industry Minister An Deok-keun could also visit the U.S. for high-level talks. Amid growing concerns over the impact Trump's tariffs may have on South Korea's economy, a business delegation led by the chairman of SK Group and the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Choi Tae-won, will visit Washington for a 2-day visit starting Wednesday. It will mark the first visit by a Korean business delegation since the Trump administration took office last month. The Korea International Trade Association also plans to send a 10-member delegation to a number of southern states next month to promote South Korea's investments in the region. The Federation of Korean Industries is also looking to send a delegation to the U.S. Faced with Trump's aggressive trade policies, South Korean businesses are expected to seek strategies to mitigate the risk of operating in the U.S. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Acting President Choi Sang-mok has declared an all-out effort aimed at negotiating a constructive trade deal with the U.S. amid the latter's tariff campaign, adding that each country's respective response to America's new trade policy will determine its fate. Now, remarks to this end were shared at a cabinet meeting earlier on this Tuesday, during which Choi pledged 360 trillion Korean won, or some $250 billion in support of financing trade. This latest amount is the largest level of support for trade in the nation's history. He also revealed that plans have been in the works to diversify export markets and products. Separately, making note of a planned trip to the U.S. by a business delegation also this week, he claimed joint efforts by the government and corporate sector will guide the country beyond this current challenge. Korea's auto exports lost substantial ground in January owing to fewer working days given the prolonged Lunar New Year holiday. Our Secy covers this latest data.
South Korea's automobile exports saw a sharp decline last month. Data from the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy released on Tuesday shows that the declines were impacted by fewer working days due to the Lunar New Year holiday in the last week of January. The country's auto exports totaled $4.99 billion in January, nearly 20% down from a year ago. While this figure fell short of last year's all-time high for the month, it still marks the second largest January export value on record. By volume, exports dropped nearly 18%, with Hyundai Motor and Kia Motor both seeing double-digit declines. Hyundai shipped over 85,000 units, down more than 15%, while Kia's exports fell nearly 18% to just under 77,000. Among the smaller auto firms, KG Mobility and Renault Korea recorded export growth, while GM Korea saw a decline of nearly 30%. Eco-friendly vehicle exports declined slightly, dropping more than 4% overall. While hybrid and plug-in hybrid exports surged, demand for electric vehicles weakened, with EV shipments plunging by nearly 42%. As well as fewer working days in January, a high base effect from the record-breaking performance last January also played a role. Following U.S. President Donald Trump's announcement that tariffs could be imposed on automobiles starting in early April, a significant impact is expected. Although the exact plan has not been revealed yet, it is predicted that any decision will greatly affect South Korea, as more than half of its automobile exports go to the U.S. The domestic sales volume in January exceeded 105,000 units, marking a 9% decrease compared to the same month last year. Secy, Arirang News.
Senior U.S. officials and their Russian counterparts are sitting down in Saudi Arabia today to outline a peace plan for Ukraine, but the absence of Ukraine and Europe at the table is prompting much concern. Our Choi reports.
High-ranking officials from Washington and Moscow are set to meet in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday to lay the groundwork for potential peace negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. The U.S. and Russia confirmed that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will meet, along with other top officials. This marks one of the first high-level in-person meetings between the two sides in years and is expected to pave the way for a future U.S.-Russia summit.
President Trump mentioned Saudi Arabia when talking about a possible venue for a possible summit. It is understood that this place suits both American and Russian sides, so this joint decision was made.
This development has raised concerns among leaders of Ukraine and Europe who have been left out of the U.S.-led diplomatic effort. U.S. President Donald Trump's Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg said on Monday that it was unrealistic for everyone to be at the table, but emphasized that no peace deal would be imposed on Kyiv. He also said the U.S. would act as an intermediary alongside Ukraine and Russia as the two main protagonists.
The fact is, we're looking at, you can have the Ukrainians, the Russians, and clearly the Americans at the table talking, but we've got to have specifics to get to a point.
European leaders held an emergency meeting in France on Monday and insisted they must have a say in the talks. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warned that Europe's security is at a turning point, stressing the issue was not just about Ukraine, but also Europe. And despite U.S. officials suggesting that Ukraine and Europe would have a role in peace talks, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday dismissed Tuesday's negotiations taking place without him and told reporters that he did not know anything about them. In response to recent U.S. statements about ruling out Ukraine's NATO membership, Zelensky cautioned the West against repeating past mistakes, warning that it could lead to a scenario similar to Afghanistan in 2021. Back then, the Taliban rapidly took control of Afghanistan after the U.S. and NATO withdrew their forces. Choi, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, staying in Saudi Arabia, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman on Monday. While details of their discussions have not been fully disclosed, a statement by the U.S. State Department claimed the meeting, quote, reaffirmed their commitment to implementing the ceasefire in Gaza and ensuring the release of all hostages. Rubio also reportedly touched upon the prospects of greater economic and defense cooperation between the two countries. In other news, relevant authorities here say Chinese application DeepSeek has indeed transferred user data to a third party. Our Moon Hye-ryan has details.
South Korean data privacy regulators have confirmed that DeepSeek, the Chinese artificial intelligence startup facing controversy over data collection, has shared user data with TikTok's parent company, ByteDance. The Personal Information Protection Commission said on Tuesday that although they were able to confirm the transmission of user data, it is yet to determine the exact nature and amount of data transferred. The PIPC launched an independent investigation into DeepSeek's data collection and processing methods after requesting clarification on the matter from the firm last month, finding that DeepSeek's privacy policy fell short of the requirements listed for service providers in the country's Personal Information Protection Act.
Under South Korean law, transferring personal data overseas or moving it from one country to another requires a legal basis. In this case, while ByteDance does have a headquarters in the U.S., when the PIPC says that user data was sent to ByteDance, it means there was an international data transfer. So the concern is whether DeepSeek complied with South Korea's regulations on cross-border data transfers.
The firm acknowledged that it had not fully considered South Korean data protection laws when launching its global service and took the recommendation of the PIPC to temporarily suspend services in South Korea while necessary modifications are made. This means that no new users can download the app across any domestic app market such as Apple's App Store and Google Play, but existing users can continue to use it for the time being as the PIPC considers further measures to protect existing users. During the suspension period, the PIPC plans to continue its thorough review of DeepSeek's handling practices. Legislative efforts are also underway to amend the Personal Information Protection Act to reflect AI innovation with this latest development, strengthening enforcement measures for foreign service providers. Experts say that it will be necessary to consider other AI services for legislative changes, not just DeepSeek.
Clear discussions on what standards should apply to all the new AI systems that will come out in the future are needed. AI is only going to become more widespread, and for it to provide more personalized services, it's going to need access to more of our personal information.
The PIPC also plans to seek stronger international cooperation on AI-related data privacy regulations at the Global Privacy Assembly in Seoul this September. Moon Hye-ryan, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics is holding on to its lead in the global TV market for 19 years in a row. According to global market research firm Omdia on Tuesday, Samsung last year also accounted for the greatest share of the global TV market with 28.3%. The company dominated the premium sector, securing almost half of the market, with its OLED TV sales surging to 1.4 million units, up 42% on year. However, LG Electronics remained the leader in the OLED TV market for the 12th straight year, with a market share of over 50%. In medical news, bladder cancer has a relatively higher survival rate if detected early. Accordingly, researchers here have come up with a simple urine test to allow for an early diagnosis and prompt treatment. Our Cha Yun-kyung has more.
Researchers have developed a diagnostic test to detect early-stage bladder cancer, with the data detailing it being published in Nature Biomedical Engineering last November. The researchers took the video of urine samples from patients with bladder cancer and those without with a smartphone 30 minutes after putting the sample in a small optical device. For the test, they put the urine samples into small optical devices and added water with a fluorescent material, hydrogel, and oil. The fluorescent material in the water rose to the oil level in samples with bladder cancer cells. On the other hand, the fluorescent material remained at the water level for non-cancerous cells. The key is the hydrogel film that is degraded by bladder cancer-specific enzymes. When these enzymes degrade hydrogel films, the fluorescent material with buoyant properties in the film floats upward. Diagnostic tests for bladder cancer already exist. However, it is hard to detect early-stage cancer. That is because there is too small amount of sample, including cancer cells in the urine and hematuria, which is one of the main symptoms of bladder cancer. Researchers solved this problem by using the separation nature of oil and water.
We found technology to make fluorescent material float on the upper oil level while filtering out impurities in the water level by using double layers of water and oil.
Also, they explained that bladder cancer can be detected with only a small amount of cells, as cancer-specific enzymes can amplify the fluorescent material through a repeated response. The research team achieved positive results after conducting clinical trials with Korea University College of Medicine, recording 88% sensitivity for the diagnosis, while a former test was 20%. They are planning on commercializing the diagnostic test by establishing a bioventure company next year. Cha Young-kyung, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. Just before the deadline for Israel's full withdrawal from Lebanon, an Israeli drone strike killed the head of Hamas military operations in the country. On Monday, the Israeli military confirmed that a targeted drone strike in Sidon, southern Lebanon, killed Mohammad Shaheen, the head of Hamas operations department in Lebanon. Israel says Shaheen was involved in planning attacks against Israeli citizens with support from Iran. The incident occurred just one day before the February 18th deadline for Israel's full withdrawal from southern Lebanon, as stated in a recent ceasefire agreement. In response, Hezbollah's leadership has issued strict warnings, stating that any Israeli presence in southern Lebanon beyond the agreed-upon deadline will be considered an occupation, and they're prepared to take necessary actions. China has condemned the United States following a recent update to the U.S. State Department's website concerning Taiwan. The alteration has contrastingly received a welcome response from Taiwan. On Monday, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson criticized updates made by the U.S. State Department last week on its online fact sheet on Taiwan. The State Department removed the phrase that said it does not support Taiwan's independence. The Chinese spokesperson said the U.S. position sent the wrong message to Taiwan's independence separatist forces and urged the U.S. to immediately rectify its mistakes. Conversely, the Taiwanese government described the updated language as positive and friendly, reflecting the strengthening ties between Washington and Taipei. In Canada, a Delta Airlines plane crash-landed on Monday at Toronto Pearson International Airport, flipping upside down upon impact. The aircraft carried 76 passengers and 4 crew members. Emergency responders reported at least 15 injuries, with 3 critical injuries, including a child. While the cause of the crash is yet unknown, the flight was operating amid windy weather after a snowstorm. Initial investigations point to the recent heavy snowfall as the cause of the crash. All flights at the airport were suspended, causing delays and diversions. Finally, in Hong Kong, its first locally born giant panda twins were revealed to the public for the first time. The 6-month-old cubs, born in August 2024, were introduced to large crowds at Hong Kong's Ocean Park over the weekend. The 2 baby pandas are currently referred to as elder sister and little brother, but a public contest to name them has been launched, and the submissions will open until March 7th. The so-called panda economy is expected to boost tourism and local businesses in the city. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Today's Usu on the lunar calendar, which means the snow melts and becomes rain. However, instead of spring rain, the weather got colder than yesterday. The cold wave warnings, which were issued in the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province and northeastern parts of Gyeongsang-buk-do province, have been extended. The morning temperature in Seoul will drop even further tomorrow, with the feels-like temperature plunging to minus 12 degrees Celsius. The morning temperature in Seoul is expected to remain around minus 7 degrees throughout the week. Please dress extra warm when you go out. Tomorrow will be a bit colder than today across the country, with Chuncheon at minus 11 degrees. Daily highs will stay in the single digits. Seoul will move up to only 1 degree. It will reach 4 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. With a heavy snow advisory in place, up to 20 centimeters of heavy snow will fall by Thursday on Ulleungdo and Dokdo Islands. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, so do stay with us.
How to survive in Korea. Barbecue restaurants. Step 1. Taking care of your clothes. Put your jacket in the plastic bag. Seal it tight. If the stool flips open, store your clothes inside. Wearing light colors? Grab an apron. It's the best defense against oil splatter and smoke. Step 2. Bottomless side dishes. Basic side dishes at a barbecue restaurant. Eat, and eat as much as you want. Side dishes come with free refills. Oh, and if you don't see this sign, just ask, 사장님, 여기 밑반찬 좀 더 주세요. Simple, isn't it? Step 3. Grilling meat. There are various kinds of samgyeopsal in Korea. Place the meat on the grill. Turn it over when golden. And again when it looks done. Again and again and again. Step 4. Sam style. You aren't taking bites of sam like a taco, are you? In Korea, we have it in one bite. A pro tip here. Add only as much as you can handle in a bite. Gotta avoid awkward situations. Step 5. Enjoy the perks. After the meal, enjoy the perks offered as a Korean restaurant. Fabric refreshers get rid of the barbecue smell, while mint candies freshen your breath. Did you survive the barbecue restaurant? Hang on. Are you here with someone you want to impress? Then let's skip the garlic. Who knows what will happen?
Setame baka sir down, yeah.
On the margins of an annual security meeting in Munich this past weekend, Foreign Minister Choi and his US and Japanese counterparts Marco Rubio and Takeshi Iwaya respectively reaffirmed their resolve to rid the Korean peninsula of nuclear weapons, putting to rest fears of a potential shift in America's policy on North Korea's nuclear ambitions. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, February 18th here in Seoul. I'm Min San-hee. Today we touch upon the trilateral commitment to root out North Korea's nuclear weapons ambitions as South Korea, the US and Japan reaffirmed their security partnership for regional stability at their first three-way meeting since the return of the Trump administration. For this, I have Sébastien Felletti with French daily Le Figaro here in the studio. Sébastien, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation.
I also have Shreyas Reddy with American website NK News. Shreyas, it's a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
We'll start with you, Shreyas. Let's start with details of the trilateral meeting among top diplomats of Seoul, Washington and Tokyo. In Munich this past weekend, what was discussed and what were some of your takeaways from that meeting?
Well, perhaps the biggest takeaway from the meeting was the three foreign ministers reiterating their shared commitment to the complete denuclearization of North Korea. Now, this is something that has been in question for a while, particularly with the Trump administration. There have been occasionally some statements this way, that way, not entirely reassuring to South Korea and Japan and other countries perhaps, but that was one thing that they emphasized, as well as the unshakable trilateral alliance, or trilateral partnership rather, which is something, again, with Trump over the last few months, there have been repeated concerns. Is he going to be there for Washington's allies? And that is something that they were very keen to emphasize, saying trilateral exercises and deterrence against North Korean threats will continue. Alongside that, they also condemn North Korea's human rights abuses and pledge to continue cooperation there, call for the return of abductees, detainees and prisoners of war held by North Korea, along with efforts to counter its other threats, so cyber threats, sanctions evasion, lots of activities. There was also, of course, some focus on non-North Korea themes, so talking about cooperation when it comes to threats across the Indo-Pacific region, including the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, and perhaps of relevance to South Korea and Japan's other interests. They were talking about cooperation on continuing economic cooperation in crucial areas, including emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, and of course other areas, for example, energy. So I think in South Korea's case, liquefied natural gas was a key priority. But I think fundamentally, though, the biggest takeaway was trilateral cooperation is still here to stay, at least on paper.
Right, and staying with that, Sébastien, does this latest trilateral commitment to ridding the Korean peninsula of nuclear weapons eradicate concerns about a potential shift in US policy with regard to North Korea? Or do you envision the Trump administration accepting North Korea as a nuclear power going down the road?
Well, the short answer will be it probably didn't fully reassure Seoul on this critical issue, because we've heard conflicting messaging from Washington since the beginning of the Trump administration. Of course, as Shreya said, this is quite a relief to Seoul and Japan and many allies, US allies, that actually there was this meeting in Munich, but there was also a G7 foreign minister meeting where it was clearly stated that so-called complete denuclearization of North Korea was still the goal envisaged by all these allies, and it seems significant that the US, who was in the room, signed up to this. So that's clearly a sign that there's some continuity. But at the same time, we have a new US president who, on the very first day of his office, said that North Korea was a nuclear power. He used that word, So there's a lot of ambiguity about why use that word. We know with Donald Trump also semantic can be sometimes a bit slippery. To what extent it used it in purpose, but it sounds very much like a signal sent to Kim Jong-un. We know he has a personal relationship with Kim Jong-un during his first mandate. He met him at least on 3 occasions. They had a very deep exchanges, and during his campaign, President Trump said he wanted to resume high-level contact with him. He was open to relaunch his diplomacy. So all this said, of course, it's normal in Seoul, but also in Tokyo, but also among other allies in Europe, there is a concern that the new Trump administration is going to reopen that file with a fresh approach and potentially do a kind of aggiornamento where you basically say, now this strategy has failed. We need to look at North Korea in a different light. And to finish, I mean, North Korea is exactly saying this. They made a statement just a few hours ago saying that basically the U.S. policy, the U.S. statement is, I quote them, outdated and absurd, which means basically they are basically saying this is going nowhere. We need to open a new chapter, start on a new basis. So the whole question is to what extent Trump administration is going in that direction. For now, they're playing ambiguity, but we know that Donald Trump loves to use ambiguity as a leverage.
Right. And in the meantime, Tues, just for the sake of some perspective, before we delve any further, could you walk us through the estimates of nuclear warheads per country as shared by the Federation of American Scientists?
Right. So according to the Federation of American Scientists, as of last year, at least early last year, they estimated that 9 countries possessed more than 12,000 nuclear warheads. Now, obviously, the numbers vary quite significantly between those countries. Since we're on the topic of North Korea's denuclearization, perhaps we can start with that. So North Korea, at least on paper, is at the very bottom of the list with 50 warheads according to their estimates. But at the same time, we should bear in mind with North Korea, there are no absolutes. No one's entirely clear what's going on inside the country. So the Federation also estimated that North Korea has enough fissile material to produce as many as 90 nuclear warheads. But again, it could be even greater because this was all before Kim Jong-un and state media revealed the existence of an entirely new uranium enrichment plant a few months ago. And so it's quite possible that that estimate may be revised again this year to suggest North Korea may have even more. But for now, at least, North Korea is at the bottom of that list. If we're talking about the heavy hitters, though, right at the top, you've got the old Cold War powers. So Russia with more than 5,500 nuclear warheads, and the US not too far behind with more than 5,000. And then you've got, in a distant third, China with about 500 warheads. And I think that tells you just the gap between the US and Russia and the rest of the world. So I think for now, at least, that if there is any danger, it's going to come from those 2 or 3 countries.
Right. And in recent times, Tues, US President Donald Trump, he called for nuclear arms control talks with Russia and China. Could you tell us a bit about his intentions?
Yes. Well, part of his rhetoric has, of course, been about the sheer threat posed by these weapons. He said that that if these countries' stockpiles alone could destroy the world 50, maybe even 100 times over. So on one hand, part of it is about the destructive potential. But when it comes to Donald Trump, as we've often seen in other cases, cost is perhaps a big factor as well. So he stressed that all 3 countries could do with cutting their military budgets, maybe even half their budgets, just by reducing their emphasis on nuclear development. And he said, essentially, we're spending a lot of money that we don't need to be doing. So it's saying we already have all these missiles. why produce more nuclear warheads? So that is perhaps the overarching factor. And perhaps we can say that at some stage he will get down to this, or at least he will push for it. But for now, at least, even Trump himself admits the big priority is dealing with the war in Ukraine and conflict in the Middle East. Eventually, though, he might want to address this, perhaps also with an eye on the threat from China, which he has warned could exceed or match the US count in as soon as 5 to 6 years from now.
Right, and against the backdrop of this call by Mr. Trump for nuclear arms talks with Russia and China, quite a number of pundits, Sebastian, have been weighing in with contrasting views about whether or not the Trump administration will lead to more nuclear weapons or less nuclear weapons, or fewer nuclear weapons in the world. Could you share these conflicting views with us, including the reasons and, of course, your thoughts as well?
Yeah, of course, this is a crucial question, because if we hear Donald Trump since his first day in office, he introduced himself as a peacemaker, someone who wants to bring peace to this world. He set his eye on this goal. And what he mentioned in the last few days that Choi has talked about, that he even suggested that, yeah, we should all reduce our weapon with a cost in mind. Well, this offer sounds very generous and sounds also like a gesture of openness, but we should bear in mind the context. I mean, it's been years that the US, this is mainly targeting probably to China, and it's been years that the US are trying to drag China into the negotiation. There's been some arms control negotiation in Russia and the US since the Cold War. And the US have been recently trying to bring China to the table because they are concerned about China military development. But so far, Beijing doesn't want to join them. Beijing is saying, as Shreya said, you are still, guys, far ahead. I mean, China has only 500 warheads compared to several thousand for the two other countries. So China is just saying, wait, we are not in the same league. But at the same time, the US are very concerned about rapid development in China. China could be tripling its number of warhead by 2035, was saying a recent report by the Pentagon. So, I mean, I think this suggestion by Donald Trump has very little chance to be accepted in Beijing. And to the broader question that you ask, whether Trump could reduce the nuclear threat in this world, I mean, this is, of course, a very speculative question at this stage. But there's a lot of conflicting view on this, because at the same time, we are seeing that the way he treats his own allies, the way he's challenging even NATO, the way he's sending conflicting messaging to Korea, to Japan. I mean, this could also encourage domestic race for nuclear weapons. We know that in South Korea, there has been a growing number of people, including President Yoon, who mentioned the possibility for South Korea one day to go nuclear. And of course, if you don't trust the US umbrella anymore, that might encourage you to go that way. So this is still a very early stage, but the way Trump is going to deal with his own ally might have a lot of implication for that nuclear question. And the next 4 years will be very important in that respect.
Right, for sure. Shreyas, last week you covered the concerns of a senior US military official about North Korea's ICBM advances, and these concerns, of course, were addressed by North Korea, according to an article by Reuters soon after. Let's start off with details about your coverage and then, of course, North Korea's response.
So this is essentially the commander of the US military's Northern Command, Gregory Geo. So he warned that the Hwasong-19 solid propellant missile, which North Korea first tested in October, has the potential to hit targets all across the mainland US. Now, that's something that greatly increases their threat, but at the same time, the danger is also in the nature of the missile as a solid fuel missile, which essentially shortens the time needed to prepare it. And his warning was, if they launch one of these, if they launch several of these, it would greatly reduce the U.S. Response time, the time to be able to detect and deal with such threats. And this is something that the U.S. has been concerned about some time as North Korea greatly expands its capabilities, its array of nuclear-capable missiles. And this is something that will continue even further because Kim Jong-un has repeatedly emphasized in recent years, particularly in the last few months, they want to be able to expand their nuclear arsenal. They want to greatly increase it and move from just being able to develop them and test them to having a full strategic reserve. This is obviously of great concern to the US, particularly after Kim Jong-un in late December also said North Korea would introduce its most hostile anti-US policy so far. So that's something that obviously was weighing on General Keo's testimony, particularly with the recent rhetoric. Now, North Korea has since responded to his words in very predictable fashion, just as they often do. They tried to frame their nuclear buildup as a justified response to US threats. They, as Sebastian pointed out, they just did that again today. They said, we are going to remain a nuclear state. We're going to continue developing nukes just because we are worried about US-led threats. They're the reason we have this nuclear problem on the Korean Peninsula in the first place. So once again, they released a statement on Saturday saying we're not going to stop our nuclear development, and we need this because it's the only way we can protect ourselves from the US and its allies, including South Korea and Japan.
You're right. Staying with this, Sebastian, as Shreyas mentioned, and as you mentioned earlier, North Korea, it's been escalating its hardline rhetoric and actions, even as Mr. Trump has spoken of reaching out to Kim Jong-un. Now, in the most recent display, if I may, of defiance, North Korea began dismantling a reunion center for separated Korean families. What do you suppose is the purpose of such bellicose rhetoric and actions? Do you suppose North Korea is seeking leverage ahead of a potential meeting with Mr. Trump?
Well, I mean, there's two tracks, because there's also, let's not forget the peninsula track, which is the inter-Korean relationship. I mean, what is Kim Jong-un doing now is in line with his big policy shift he announced last year, where he basically declared now South Korea as a so-called hostile state, and basically turning his back on the goal of reunification. This is quite a departure from the historical departure from the traditional policy of North Korea. We've seen last year they started exploding the roads connecting the two Koreas. So what's happening now with this Center for Family Reunion is like another stretch in that direction, telling Seoul, South Korea, we don't want to have any contact with you guys. We're not anymore brother. We're not anymore in connection. We're not anymore a big family. We don't want to hear anything about you. So that's a signal sent to Seoul. And we should bear in mind also that the political situation in Seoul currently is very fluid. We don't know what's going to happen in the coming months with a potential new election, a potential new administration. So also, probably North Korea is watching that very closely and preparing potentially for the next move. And then, as you mentioned, there's of course the more bigger implication when it comes to the US. It's also part of this strategy of ramping up pressure on the international community, on the US, showing its determination and hoping to maybe get attention from the US and potentially open the door to some talk. But I think it's very early days, and also, of course, the US is very busy on other fronts. So it's just probably the beginning of a chapter of tension.
Right. Shreyas, then, based on your coverage of North Korea-related news, what prerequisites do you believe need to be in place to perhaps nudge North Korea back to the negotiating table?
Well, the short version is North Korea has no intention of returning to negotiations, at least as long as the US South Korea and Japan and other countries insist on complete denuclearization. That is a term they will not accept. They have cemented their irreversible nuclear status in their laws at this stage, and they do not really see any need to change that. A part of the factor is also they don't really trust other countries to be able to live up to it. We've seen certainly South Korea and the US, as administrations change, they often change policies. Trump himself backed out from Barack Obama's Iran nuclear deal previously. So for them, they're not going to risk what they see as a nuclear deterrent that keeps the regime safe. But at the same time, perhaps, let's say, if they see room for flexibility from other sides, they may perhaps be willing to eventually come back. Also depends on the situation in North Korea. They certainly could do with some economic support. So if they see perhaps partial sanctions relief as an option on the table, they might consider it. Also, perhaps the US, if Donald Trump says denuclearization is going nowhere, how about we head toward arms control or some other method that offers partial concessions in exchange for partial measures from North Korea? It may be possible, but the bottom line at the moment is no side is quite willing to budge, particularly North Korea.
Right, so much uncertainty going forward then. Right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Shreyas, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you very much.
And Sebastian, thank you very much for your insights.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. We see you back here same time tomorrow.